I went to live with my daughter, but she told her kids, "This woman is just our maid." Until the truth came out. Some journeys end in a warm embrace. Others end at a locked door with someone you love pretending not to know your name. This is the story of a mother whose hands built a future, and a daughter who tried to erase those hands from her past. Margaret stood at the curb with a wheeled suitcase and a brown paper bag of medicine. The afternoon sun glazed the cul-de-sac in polite gold. Trimmed hedges, a white mailbox shaped like a birdhouse, a black SUV shining like a mirror. She had timed her steps, slow, careful, counting them from the bus stop to the house her daughter owned, the house she had helped make possible without ever stepping inside. She tightened the scarf at her neck. Her palms were dry. Her heartbeat was not. The front door opened before she could ring. Linda stood framed by cool air and glossy tile, one hand on the handle, the other cradling a phone. She wore a cream blouse that did not wrinkle, a small watch that blinked like a private secret. Her face, beautiful, polished, held the kind of smile people practice when they don't want to fight but also don't want to feel. "Mom," she said, soft but flat. "You made it." "By God's mercy," Margaret answered, smiling through the ache in her knees. The bus shook like a tin can. "But I'm here." A boy's laughter echoed somewhere deeper in the house. A girl's footsteps pattered on tile, then stopped. Two small faces, brown eyes so much like Linda's, peered around the staircase. The boy clutched a red toy car. The girl had a pink headband with a crooked bow. They looked at Margaret the way children look at a new country. Curious, careful, ready to believe. Linda's smile thinned. She stepped halfway into the doorway so the children saw mostly her. "Kids," she called, tipping her chin toward Margaret without turning her head. "This is someone who'll be helping us around the house for a while." Margaret blinked. The words came like a cool cloth pressed over a flame. Not burning, just smothering. She forced the smile to stay. "Hello, little ones," she said, her voice warmed by old lullabies. "I'm Margaret." The boy edged closer. "Are you a cleaner?" he asked. The girl whispered, "Do you live here?" Their questions tangled like threads at her feet. Margaret answered neither. She looked at Linda. "Come inside," Linda said quickly, voice brightening as if for an audience. "Let's get you settled." The foyer smelled like lemon polish and something floral she could not name. The floor shone so clean that her suitcase wheels seemed to apologize as they rolled. Family portraits lined the hall in dark frames. Beach days in matching shirts, birthday candles, school smiles with gap teeth. In one picture, the children hugged a woman who looked like an advertisement for a perfect life. Margaret glanced for herself in those frames and found emptiness wrapped in expensive glass. Robert came from the kitchen wiping his hands on a towel. He was a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes that tried to be kind before they were anything else. "Mrs." He stopped, uncertain which word to use, watched his wife, then finished carefully. "Margaret. Welcome." She nodded. "Thank you." He took the suitcase. "It's not heavy," she murmured, but he lifted it anyway, the way a good man lifts a thing because he can. "Guest room?" he asked Linda, not looking at her, not looking away. Linda pressed her lips together, then smiled at her husband like they were partners in a difficult dance. "No, the other one," she said lightly. "Closer to the laundry. It's quieter there." Quieter. The word landed like a blanket thrown over a cage. They walked past the living room. Two cream couches, a piano with a shut lid, sunlight pooling on a white rug, and turned into a narrow hall that smelled of detergent and steam. The room had a single small window that stared at a fence. A thin bed, a low dresser, a chair with a wobble. A folded blanket waited like a small apology. "It's cozy," Linda said, as if she were selling something on a screen. "It will do," Margaret replied, placing her paper bag on the dresser, steadying herself with the edge of the chair. Hands that once counted coins now counted breaths. She looked at the window and saw only wood. "Still," she said, "it's a blessing to be near family." Linda exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh. "Right. So, a few house rules while we're all adjusting." She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed gently, as if gentleness could disguise the shape of the arms. Please don't worry yourself with the children's routines, that's on us. Don't feel obligated to entertain guests or, sit in the main room when we have company. And if the doorbell rings, I'll get it. Robert stood quiet with the suitcase at his feet, eyes mapping the room's smallness. The children had followed them, hovering like butterflies too polite to land. The little girl looked from the thin bed to Margaret's shoes. Do you have a room like mine? She asked. Margaret's smile quivered. This is my room, she said softly. Oh, the girl replied, puzzled. But it's little. Sweetie, Linda said, not unkindly, drawing her daughter back. She's just here to help Mommy. We're grateful, but she needs quiet. Okay, the child said, and the boy repeated it because that is what boys do when they love their mothers. Robert cleared his throat. Would you like tea, Margaret? He asked, landing on her name like a lifeboat. Honey, lemon. Hot water would be enough, she said. Thank you. He nodded and slipped away. Linda touched her blouse, smoothing a wrinkle that did not exist. I have a call in 5. We'll talk more later. Rest if you're tired. Tired visits, it never stays, Margaret said, then wished she had not said it. Linda paused, eyes flicking like a small light behind a curtain. We all have our histories, she said, as if the word were dangerous. Let's try to keep things simple. She left with the children, her hand on their shoulders guiding them into a house that belonged to her. The laundry room hummed back into the quiet. Margaret sat on the wobbling chair, pressed her thumb to the label on her pill bottle, and closed her eyes. Mr. Hope voiceover. Do you know the weight of pride? It can turn a mansion into a prison and a mother into a stranger. But listen carefully. Love is patient. It waits in the smallest rooms. It waits by the laundry. It waits behind doors that will one day open. Footsteps returned, lighter, hesitant. The little girl slipped in first, the boy right behind. They carried a plate with 2 buttered crackers and a glass of water, trembling with their careful hands. Mom said not to bother you, the boy whispered. But we thought maybe you're hungry. Margaret blinked away the sting in her eyes and took the plate. You are very kind, she said. What are your names? I'm Lila, the girl said, smiling like a sunrise that had not yet learned shame. He's Max. What's your name again? Margaret, she replied. People used to call me Maggie. Can we call you that? Max asked. Margaret swallowed. If you like. Lila leaned closer, studying her face the way children study a map to a place they don't know they're from. You smell like cinnamon, she murmured. It's the tea, Margaret said, and for a moment the room grew warm, not because of the window, not because of the light, but because 2 small hearts had come in where a large one could not. Linda's voice floated from the hall, cheerful and firm. Kids, come on. Let's give her space. They hurried out with reluctant steps. The door eased shut. Margaret put the crackers aside, took the glass in both hands, and drank. The water tasted like the first honest thing she'd been given all day. She set it down, rested her palm on the thin blanket, and whispered into the quiet. God, keep my tongue soft and my heart strong. In the living room, laughter rose, the piano lid lifted. A few bright notes fell like coins in a bowl. In the small room by the laundry, a mother folded her sorrow as if it were a shirt, placed it neatly in a drawer, and told herself she had come here to be near love, even if love refused to say her name. Love does not always announce its absence with a slam of the door. Sometimes it hides behind polite smiles, behind words that sound harmless but wound deeper than knives. Margaret had stepped into her daughter's house as a mother. But within days she was treated as a maid. Margaret's mornings began before the sun touched the neat rooftops of the neighborhood. The house itself seemed to demand perfection. Polished floors, dustless counters, a kitchen that smelled of lemon and heat. Linda had pressed a set of instructions into Margaret's hand as casually as one might give a grocery list. Laundry folded a certain way, meals timed to her children's schedules, dishes stacked in the right cupboards. Don't overstep, Linda had added. And please don't confuse the children. They already have routines. So Margaret scrubbed pans, wiped fingerprints off glass doors, and ironed clothes until her back bent in silent protest. When she tried to join the children at the breakfast table, Linda's voice cut across the room. "Mom," she caught herself, lowering her tone. "Margaret, the kids need space. Please, eat after them in the kitchen." The words landed like cold rain. Margaret carried her bowl of porridge into the corner, her chair scraping against tile. The children glanced at her, confused, but said nothing. Their mother's rules filled the air like invisible walls. One afternoon, Margaret tried to help Max with his school assignment. The boy had been frowning over math problems at the dining table. She leaned close, her voice gentle. "Here," she said, taking the pencil lightly. "If you group them in threes, it becomes easier. See? Like planting seeds in neat rows." Max's face brightened. "That makes sense." But before Margaret could finish, Linda swept into the room with her phone pressed to her ear. She saw them together, her son's smile blooming under Margaret's guidance. Her eyes narrowed. "Max, didn't I tell you not to disturb the help? Margaret, please stick to the chores I gave you. He has a tutor for this." The boy's smile faltered. He dropped the pencil, guilt rushing over his small face. Margaret nodded quickly, rising from the chair as though it had burned her. "I'm sorry," she murmured. Later that night, behind her closed laundry room door, she sat on the edge of her bed with her hands folded. She whispered to the silence, "Lord, I raised her with stories, with lessons. How can she now believe I am not fit to teach her son?" Robert, meanwhile, noticed more than he let on. He watched his wife introduce Margaret to a visiting neighbor. "This is Margaret," Linda said lightly. "She helps keep the house running. Couldn't manage without her." The neighbor smiled politely, but Robert's jaw tightened. He glanced at Margaret, her cheeks colored with shame, her eyes downcast, as if her whole life had been reduced to a service she never signed up for. After the neighbor left, Robert pulled Linda aside. "She's your mother. Why do you keep introducing her as?" Linda's eyes flashed. "Because she chose that role the moment she walked in here. Do you know how embarrassing it is, Robert? My friends would never understand. It's easier this way." Robert wanted to protest, but decades of quiet compromise kept his lips sealed. The final humiliation of that week came at dinner. Linda had invited colleagues for a meal. The house glowed with laughter and clinking glasses. Margaret had cooked everything: stew, roasted chicken, fresh bread. The guests praised the flavors, but Linda shrugged with false modesty. "Oh yes, we're lucky. Our maid is a decent cook." The word hit Margaret like a whip. She stood by the doorway, apron stained with oil, her hands trembling against the tray she carried. Her heart thundered with memories. The night she skipped meals so Linda could eat, the hours she worked at the market to buy books for her daughter, the sleepless evenings sewing clothes under a single bulb. Now, before strangers, she was stripped of her name. Robert noticed her eyes, how they glistened, how quickly she turned away to hide her pain. He said nothing in front of the guests, but that night he could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing his wife's laughter echo over Margaret's silence. There is a silence heavier than anger, the silence of a mother who swallows every insult because her love refuses to abandon a child, even when that child abandons her. Margaret endured her daughter's cruelty because she believed that one day, truth would rise like dawn. But first, she would have to walk through nights darker than she ever imagined. Some prisons have walls. Others have curtains, polished floors, and chandeliers. But the heaviest chains are the ones that are invisible, woven from shame, silence, and the memory of sacrifice. Margaret's life in her daughter's house quickly took on a rhythm. Not the gentle rhythm of family warmth, but the grinding, endless pace of labor. She woke before everyone, moving on aching knees through cold tiles to prepare breakfast. By the time the children came yawning down the stairs, plates of eggs, toast, and fruit were already on the table. Linda smiled at them, kissed their foreheads, and never once acknowledged the woman who had cooked it all. After the school run, The house fell silent, except for Margaret's work. She scrubbed bathrooms until her hands stung. She ironed Robert's shirts, folding the collars just so. She polished glass tables, mopped the marble, and knelt in the garden pulling weeds that had dared to grow among Linda's roses. From the street, neighbors saw her bending under the sun and assumed she was hired help. Some waved politely. Others didn't look at all. Linda never corrected them. One Saturday, a neighbor leaned over the fence, holding a steaming mug. "Good morning," she said to Linda, who was trimming the hedges for show while Margaret knelt behind her pulling weeds. "You've really got a hard-working maid." Linda's laugh was light, rehearsed. "Yes, we're fortunate. She's family in her own way." Margaret froze, her knuckles deep in soil. Family in her own way. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, her tears falling quietly onto the earth. Inside the house, Robert noticed things Linda did not. He saw how Margaret moved slowly, pausing to press her lower back against the counter for support. He heard her coughs echo in the laundry room at night. Once, he passed by her door and saw her bent over, massaging her swollen ankles, whispering a prayer. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She startled, pulling the blanket over her feet. "I am fine. Just tired bones." Robert wanted to ask more, but Linda called from down the hall, her voice sharp, and he retreated. The humiliation reached a cruel peak during a dinner with Linda's friends. Margaret had set the table with silverware shining like mirrors. She placed bowls of soup carefully before the guests. One of Linda's colleagues raised a brow. "You keep her busy, don't you? Does she live in?" Linda smirked. "Oh, she insisted. Said she had nowhere else to go. I mean, what could I do? She cooks well enough, and it's nice having someone manage the small things." The table laughed politely. Margaret stood behind them, tray in hand, her heart twisting. She remembered nights when she had worked 3 jobs so Linda could attend school trips and wear clean uniforms. Those sacrifices had not been small things. They had been everything. When the laughter died, Margaret excused herself, slipping into her tiny room. She pressed her palms against her face and wept into the silence. The children began to notice the contradictions. It was Margaret who remembered to pack their favorite snacks in their lunchboxes. It was Margaret who whispered prayers over them when they left for school. It was Margaret who stayed awake at night when one of them coughed, gently placing a hand on their foreheads to check for fever. Lila once asked, "Mom, why does Margaret know all my favorite songs? Why does she sing the same lullaby you used to?" Linda's reply was sharp. "She's been around a long time. Don't read too much into it." But the children did read into it. They began asking questions their mother could not answer without revealing the truth. One evening, when Linda hosted a small gathering, Margaret mistakenly sat at the living room table before the guests arrived. She smoothed her dress, nervous but hopeful. For a moment she imagined belonging. But Linda stormed in, her face taut. "Margaret, what are you doing here? The guests will be arriving any moment. This isn't your place." Her voice cut the air. Robert shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The children froze on the stairs, watching their grandmother shrink into herself. "I'm sorry," Margaret whispered, rising to her feet. She carried her plate into the kitchen where she ate alone, her shoulders shaking. The children whispered among themselves, the word made suddenly tasting bitter in their mouths. Mr. Hope voiceover. "Sometimes the cruelest wounds are not struck with fists, but with words." Margaret was called Maid, but her heart still beat with a mother's love. She endured every insult in silence, because the truth was not yet ready to come out. But children see what adults ignore. And seeds of truth, once planted, will one day break the ground. A lie may silence truth for a season, but children have eyes sharper than grown-ups admit. They notice the cracks, the small details, the tenderness that cannot be hidden. And one day, their innocent questions become the hammer that shatters a house of pride. The children had grown used to Margaret's quiet presence. She was always there, folding their uniforms, slipping extra fruit into their lunchboxes, whispering prayers as they ran out the door. At first, they had parroted their mother's words: maid, helper, servant. But little by little, confusion crept in. It began with Lila's fever. One night, the little girl woke drenched in sweat. Linda was asleep, phone still glowing on her nightstand. Robert had returned late from work. It was Margaret who heard the soft coughs through the thin wall of her room. She hurried to Lila's side, laying a cool cloth on her forehead, humming a lullaby. The child's eyes fluttered open. "That song," she whispered. "Mommy used to sing that when I was small." Margaret froze. Her lips trembled, but she finished the song, brushing damp hair from Lila's face. "Sleep, my little one," she murmured. By morning Lila was better. She told Max, wide-eyed. "The maid sang Mom's song. How does she know it?" Max shrugged, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Days later, Max rummaged in Margaret's laundry basket looking for his missing jersey. Instead, he pulled out a worn leather pouch tucked beneath her folded clothes. Inside was a faded photograph. A young woman in a cheap dress, holding a toddler with bright eyes and a ribbon in her hair. "Hey!" he whispered, running to Lila. "Look, this is Mom when she was little." Lila's mouth fell open. "But that's Margaret holding her." Their voices carried into the hallway. Margaret entered quickly, startled. She saw the photo in Max's hand and her heart clenched. "Give that back, please," she said gently, her voice shaking. "Why are you holding Mommy?" Lila asked, eyes wide. "She looks happy." Margaret pressed the photo to her chest. "Because," she swallowed hard. "Because I was there when she was young." Before she could say more, Linda appeared. She snatched the photo out of Margaret's hands. "Kids, stop snooping," she snapped. "That's an old picture. Margaret worked for us back then too. She helped out." "But she's holding you like a baby," Max insisted. Linda's face hardened. "Enough." She was staff, nothing more. "Go finish your homework." The children obeyed, but their eyes lingered on Margaret, full of questions their mother refused to answer. That night, as Robert poured himself tea, Lila tugged his sleeve. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Why does Margaret know Mommy's lullabies? Why does she have baby pictures of Mommy?" Robert paused, teacup halfway to his lips. He glanced toward the small laundry room door where Margaret's light glowed dim. He lowered the cup, his voice careful. "Sometimes grown-ups don't tell the whole story right away." "Is she really just a maid?" Max pressed. Robert's throat tightened. "She's more than that. You'll understand soon." The children began to act differently. They lingered in Margaret's room, asking for stories. She told them gentle tales of markets and storms, of walking long roads for school, of a little girl who loved mangoes so much she'd eat them until her cheeks were sticky with juice. "That sounds like Mommy," Lila giggled. Margaret smiled, her eyes misting. "Yes, it does." They started calling her Grandma in whispers, testing the word on their tongues. Margaret corrected them at first, afraid of Linda's wrath. But in her heart she bloomed. One evening, when Linda hosted a tea party with friends, the children rushed in from outside, dirt on their shoes. "Grandma, come see our fort," Max shouted before realizing too late what he'd said. The room froze. Teacups clinked down on saucers. Linda's friends exchanged glances. Linda's smile snapped like glass. "Children," she said sharply. "What did you just call her?" Max's cheeks burned. Lila stammered. We meant Margaret. She helps us like a grandma." Linda's eyes flashed. She turned on Margaret. "I told you not to confuse them." "I never," Margaret began, but her voice broke. Robert intervened, his tone quiet but firm. "Enough, Linda. The kids are only speaking their hearts." But the damage was done. Humiliation hung thick in the air. Margaret retreated to her small room, tears dripping onto the faded photo she had retrieved from Linda's grip. Children see through masks adults wear. They see kindness where it is real, and cruelty where it hides behind pride. Max and Lila were starting to see the truth. The woman folding their clothes and singing their songs was no maid. She was blood, history, love. And no matter how hard Linda tried to bury it, truth was digging its way back into the light. Pride does not stop at a whisper. It grows louder, harsher, until it shames not only the one it targets but also the house it lives in. And when pride meets truth, the walls begin to crack. The tension in Linda's home had become a storm no one dared name. The children's questions grew sharper, Robert's silence heavier, and Margaret's strength thinner by the day. Linda, instead of softening, grew colder. One evening, she walked into the kitchen to find Margaret washing dishes, her hands red from hot water. "You've been here long enough," Linda said casually, as though remarking on the weather. "Maybe it's time you think about moving out. Maids aren't supposed to live permanently with their employers." Margaret's breath caught. "Move out." She steadied herself on the counter. "Linda, I have nowhere else. My health." Linda's eyes hardened. "Don't use your health as an excuse. I didn't ask you to sacrifice for me when I was young. Don't guilt-trip me now." The words struck like stones. Margaret bit her lip to hold back the sob. She wanted to remind her daughter of nights when she had gone hungry so Linda could eat, of shoes worn thin so Linda's feet could stay covered. But she said nothing. She only turned back to the sink, washing quietly, as tears fell into the water. A week later, Linda invited her friends for a dinner party. The house glowed with polished silverware, scented candles, and laughter that rang hollow. Margaret had spent the whole day preparing, roasting chicken, kneading bread, simmering soup. Her back ached, her chest burned with every cough, but she pushed through, determined to honor the guests. When it was time to eat, she placed a dish at the table and, for once, dared to sit down. A brief silence fell. Linda's eyes widened as though Margaret had insulted her. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her smile fixed for the guest's sake. Margaret blinked, startled. "I thought." "No," Linda's voice sliced. "You don't sit at this table. Not when we have company. The kitchen is where you belong." The guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between them. Robert clenched his jaw but stayed silent. The children, sitting stiffly, stared at their grandmother with shame in their eyes. Not for her but for their mother. Margaret rose slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. She carried her plate into the kitchen, her hands trembling, her heart screaming with humiliation. Alone, she ate in silence, tears dripping onto her food. The children could not contain themselves. That night, after the guests had gone, Max approached his mother. "Why do you always treat her like that? She's not just a maid." Linda's eyes flashed. "Enough, Max. You don't know what you're talking about." "But she knows everything about us," Lila added, her voice trembling. "She loves us. She's like our grandma." Linda slapped her hand on the counter. "Stop it. She is not your grandmother. Do you hear me? She is staff. Nothing more." The children shrank back, but the seed of rebellion had been planted. Their hearts refused to believe their mother's lie anymore. That night, Robert entered the small room where Margaret sat hunched on her narrow bed, sewing a button back onto one of Max's shirts. "You don't have to do all this," he said gently. Margaret smiled weakly. "Idle hands make the heart heavy." He sat down, his face troubled. "Linda, she shouldn't treat you this way. You don't deserve it." Margaret's eyes misted. "She's my daughter. A mother endures." Robert hesitated, then whispered, "But how long can you endure before it breaks you?" She looked at him, her gaze soft but steady. "Until truth comes. It always does." The storm was near its breaking point. Linda's cruelty had reached its peak, her pride louder than love. But storms cannot last forever. The first crack of thunder was about to fall, not from Margaret, but from the body that had endured too much for too long. The house thought it had buried truth under shame. But truth was rising, and it would not rise quietly. A heart can endure insults. A spirit can carry shame. But the body keeps its own account. And when the debt comes due, no pride, no wealth, No false title can hold it back. It happened on an ordinary morning. The house smelled of polish and fried eggs. Margaret had been scrubbing the kitchen floor on her knees, humming softly through her coughs. The tiles blurred before her eyes, the mop slipped from her hand, and suddenly she felt her chest tighten like a fist closing around her lungs. She gasped, gripping the counter for support, but the room spun. The hum of the dishwasher grew distant. She collapsed to the floor, the sound of her fall muffled by the rug. It was not Linda who found her. It was the children. "Grandma!" Lila screamed, running into the kitchen with Max right behind her. The words slipped from her mouth unguarded, instinctual. They knelt beside her, shaking her fragile shoulders. "Grandma, wake up!" Max cried, tears already spilling down his cheeks. Their shrieks brought Robert rushing in. He dropped his briefcase, kneeling beside Margaret. "Call an ambulance now," he barked to his son, thrusting his phone into his hand. Max dialed with trembling fingers, his voice cracking as he begged for help. Linda appeared at the doorway, her face pale. For a moment she froze, staring at her mother crumpled on the floor. What happened?" she stammered. "You worked her to the bone, that's what happened." Robert snapped, his voice sharper than she had ever heard. He lifted Margaret carefully, laying her on her side until paramedics arrived. At the hospital, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Margaret lay in a narrow bed, pale against the sheets. The doctor pulled Robert and Linda aside. "She's suffering from untreated high blood pressure, exhaustion, and severe fatigue," the doctor said sternly. "This woman should have been resting, not scrubbing floors. Whoever is responsible for her care has neglected her dangerously." Robert's jaw tightened. "She was treated like a maid in her own daughter's home," he said bitterly. The doctor's eyes darkened. "She's not a maid. She's a patient now. And if she continues like this, she could lose far more than her strength." Linda flushed crimson. "Doctor, you don't understand." "No," the doctor interrupted firmly. "You don't understand. She needs love, not labor. Care, not commands." Back in the ward, the children refused to leave Margaret's side. They clutched her hands, whispering promises. "Please don't leave us, Grandma," Lila sobbed. "We love you." Margaret stirred faintly, her lips moving. "Don't cry, little ones. Grandma's here." Robert sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving Margaret's face. He reached into her worn handbag, searching for her medication to give the nurse. But instead he found documents, old school reports, hospital bills, and most telling of all, Linda's birth certificate, signed in Margaret's handwriting. His heart clenched as he pieced it together. Every sacrifice, every scar, every wrinkle on Margaret's face was tied to the woman who had denied her. Later that night, Robert confronted his wife in the hospital corridor. "You lied," he said quietly but firmly. "She's not your maid. She's your mother." Linda's face drained of color. "Robert, I've seen the papers, the bills she paid, the nights she starved for you. And yet you let our children believe she was staff. You let the neighbors believe it. You let me believe it." His voice broke with fury and grief. "Do you know the shame you've brought to yourself, to this family?" Linda's lips trembled. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want them to see where I came from. I built this life, Robert. I earned respect." Robert shook his head. "Respect built on lies is nothing. And you've humiliated the woman who gave you everything. Illness can break a body, but it can also break a lie." Margaret's collapse forced open the doors of truth. The children now knew her love was real. Robert had uncovered her sacrifices, and even Linda's mask was beginning to crack. But pride does not fall easily. And when truth finally burst into the open, it would tear through that household like a storm. A lie can live in silence, but the truth has a voice of its own. And when it finally speaks, it does not whisper. It roars, leaving no heart untouched. Margaret remained in the hospital, her body weak but her spirit still clinging to life. The children refused to leave her side, drawing pictures for her, whispering "Grandma" even when their mother scolded them. Robert, quiet and steady, brought flowers and fresh fruit, his eyes full of guilt for the silence he had kept too long. It was in that sterile hospital ward that the truth demanded to be heard. One afternoon, while Margaret rested, the children overheard the nurses speaking softly outside her room. "Such a strong woman," one said. "Imagine raising a daughter alone all those years, only for her health to fail now." "Yes," the other nurse sighed. "Her daughter should be here, caring for her. A mother like this deserves honor." The children gasped. They rushed back inside, eyes wide. "Mom lied," Max whispered. "She is our grandma." Lila clutched Margaret's hand, tears welling. "I knew it. I felt it all along." When Linda entered moments later, she found her children clinging to Margaret's bed, calling her grandma over and over. "What nonsense is this?" Linda snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "She's not your grandmother. How many times must I say it?" Robert stepped forward, his patience spent. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the birth certificate he had found in Margaret's bag. He held it up like evidence in a trial. "Enough, Linda. They deserve to know the truth. This woman," he pointed at Margaret, his voice trembling with conviction, "is not just their maid. She is your mother. And their grandmother." The room froze. The children's eyes widened, then filled with tears of joy. "Grandma," Lila whispered, hugging Margaret tighter. Linda's face flushed scarlet. "Why would you embarrass me like this, Robert? Do you know how hard I've worked to build a life people respect? Do you know what it would look like if they knew I came from nothing?" Margaret stirred weakly in the bed, her voice hoarse but steady. "From nothing. I gave you everything I had, Linda. My youth, my health, my dreams. I walked miles to sell vegetables so you could eat. I stitched clothes until my fingers bled so you could wear uniforms to school. I slept hungry so you would never know hunger. And now, in front of your children, you call me nothing." Tears streamed down her cheeks. The children wept with her. Robert bowed his head, his jaw clenched in shame. Linda's voice rose, desperate and trembling. "You abandoned me in poverty. You made me live a life I hated. And now you come here, weak and sick, wanting to live off me again." Margaret's eyes, though heavy with illness, burned with sorrowful truth. "I never abandoned you. Carried you. I carried you on my back when you were tired. I carried you in my arms when you were sick. And even now, when you deny me, I carry you in my heart." The door to the room had been left ajar, and by now nurses, orderlies, even a few patients stood in the hallway, listening. Whispers rippled through the crowd. She called her own mother a maid. Robert turned to his wife, his voice low but firm. "Linda, you've shamed the woman who made you. You've lied to your children, to your neighbors, even to me. Do you not see? The only one you've disgraced is yourself." The children, ignoring their mother's fury, clung tighter to Margaret. "We don't care what Mom says," Max declared through tears. "You're our grandma. And we love you." "Yes," Lila added, wiping her face. "We'll never call you maid again." Margaret wept openly now, pulling them close with what little strength she had. And so the truth stood naked, undeniable. The children embraced it. The husband confirmed it. The community witnessed it. And the daughter, blinded by pride, was left trembling in the ruins of her own lie. But the storm was not over. For truth not only reveals, it demands justice. When pride is exposed, it does not fall in silence. It falls in echoes, through neighbors' whispers, friends' stares, children's tears. And the one who clung to false respect is left stripped, not by enemies, but by truth itself. News traveled fast in the neighborhood. By the time Margaret was discharged from the hospital, word had spread. The woman Linda had introduced for months as just the maid was in fact her own mother. The whispers began outside the house, at the school gates, at the grocery store. "Did you hear?" one neighbor murmured. "She called her own mother the maid." "Unbelievable," another replied. All that pride, and look at the shame it brought her. Linda felt the weight of every stare. The once respectful nods from her friends turned into polite, judgmental smiles. The invitations to luncheons and book clubs stopped coming. At home, the tension boiled over. Robert confronted her directly in the living room, the children sitting silently nearby. "Do you know what people are saying?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Do you know how they look at us now? Not because of your mother, but because of you." Linda bristled. "They don't understand. They don't know what it was like growing up in poverty. I refused to be pitted. I built a life of respect, and she threatened to drag it all down." Robert shook his head. "No, Linda. You dragged yourself down. Respect doesn't come from hiding your roots. It comes from honoring them." The children, their eyes red from tears, finally spoke. "Mom," Lila whispered, "you made us call her a maid. We lied to our friends because of you. Do you know how bad that feels?" Max added, his voice trembling with hurt. "We love her. She's our grandma. Why couldn't you just tell us the truth?" Linda looked at her children, her legacy, and for the first time she saw the distance she had created. The breaking point came at a community gathering. The Homeowners Association had invited families for a spring barbecue. Linda, determined to hold her head high, arrived with her family. Margaret walked slowly beside them, leaning on a cane Robert had bought her. The neighbors' chatter hushed as they approached. Whispers stirred. Some shook their heads. One woman, bold enough to speak, approached Linda directly. "Linda, for months you introduced Margaret as your maid. Why would you hide your own mother like that?" Linda flushed, words fumbling. I didn't want pity. I wanted respect." The man scoffed. "Respect. Respect is earned by truth, not lies. Do you know how many of us would give anything to have our mothers still with us?" Another neighbor nodded. "You shamed the one person you should have been proudest of." The murmurs swelled. "Ungrateful. Cruel. Disgraceful." Linda stood frozen, her pride crumbling as every eye judged her. In that moment, Margaret stepped forward. She placed a trembling hand on Robert's arm for support and addressed the crowd. "Please," she said softly, her voice worn but steady. "Do not shame my daughter. I carried her in my womb, I carried her in my arms, and even now I carry her in my heart. She has lost her way, but she is still my child." Her words silenced the crowd. Some wiped tears. Even Robert lowered his head, moved by her grace. But the contrast was stark. Where Linda had humiliated her mother, Margaret defended her daughter. And the public saw the truth. When they returned home, Linda collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. For the first time she wept, not from anger but from shame. Her children refused to leave Margaret's side. They clung to her, calling her grandma loudly now without fear. Robert sat beside her, promising quietly, "From now on, you will be honored in this house." Linda sat apart, her sobs muffled by her palms, the echoes of her public humiliation still ringing in her ears. A proud woman had been stripped bare, not by strangers, but by the truth she tried to bury. And in her fall, the world saw what she had denied. A mother's sacrifice, a grandmother's love, and a legacy that could not be erased. But humiliation is not the end. It is only the beginning of repentance. And forgiveness, if it comes, is a crown that only the humble can wear. Shame may break a heart, but forgiveness is the only balm strong enough to mend it. A mother's love does not keep score. Even when betrayed, even when humiliated, her love waits. Like soil waits for rain, like dawn waits for night to end. The days after the barbecue were heavy in Linda's house. She no longer strutted with pride through the neighborhood. She moved in silence, curtains drawn, phone unanswered. Her children avoided her eyes. Robert spoke to her only when necessary. His disappointment sharp and unspoken. It was Margaret who softened the air. Though her body was still weak, she carried herself with grace. She cooked when she could, humming hymns. She told the children stories by the fireplace, her laughter steady despite her pain. Slowly, the house that had been suffocating with secrets began to breathe again. One evening, Robert gathered everyone in the living room. The children sat on the rug, Margaret in the armchair, her cane by her side. Linda hovered by the window, her arms crossed, her face pale. "This house cannot go on like this," Robert said firmly. "Margaret deserves honor, not shame. From today forward, she will not sleep by the laundry. She will have the guest room. She will be treated as what she is, your mother, my mother-in-law, and the children's grandmother." He turned to Linda, his eyes steady. "You can choose to keep living in denial, or you can choose to heal. But I will not allow cruelty to reign under my roof again." The children clapped softly, rushing to hug Margaret. She smiled through her tears. That night, when the house was quiet, Linda crept into her mother's room. Margaret sat by the lamp, sewing a tear in Lila's dress. She looked up, her eyes gentle. "Why are you always like this?" Linda whispered, her voice raw. "Even after everything I've done, you still care. You still defend me, even when the world mocks you because of me." Margaret set down the fabric. She patted the chair beside her. "Because you are my daughter. And a mother's love does not expire." Linda sank into the chair, her shoulders trembling. Tears spilled freely now. "I wanted respect. I wanted to be more than poor. But in trying to bury where I came from, buried you. And I don't know if you'll ever forgive me." Margaret reached out, her frail hand covering her daughter's. "Forgiveness is already yours. I never stopped loving you. I only prayed you would remember who you are." Linda broke into sobs, falling into her mother's arms. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to be held like the child in the photograph, safe and small in the arms that had carried her. In the days that followed, healing began. The children proudly introduced Margaret as their grandmother to their friends at school. Robert made sure she had everything she needed: her medication, comfortable shoes, even a rocking chair by the window where she liked to watch the sunset. At dinner, Margaret sat at the head of the table. The children insisted she say grace. Her voice shook with emotion as she prayed, thanking God for family restored, for forgiveness received, for love that had survived pride. Linda bowed her head in silence, tears slipping down her cheeks as her children echoed the prayer with loud amens. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it redeems the future. Margaret had every right to remain bitter, but she chose love. And in choosing love, she planted the seeds of healing, not just for herself, but for her daughter, her grandchildren, and her home. But forgiveness, once given, must be proven in action. And the final test of love was yet to come. Every storm, no matter how violent, must give way to calm. Every lie, no matter how heavy, must fall beneath the weight of truth. And every broken family, if love is allowed back in, can find a way to be whole again. Weeks passed, and Margaret's health improved. Her cheeks gained color, her steps grew steadier, and her laughter, soft and melodic, began to fill the halls that once echoed with silence. The children, now unashamed, clung to her every moment, proudly calling her grandma before anyone who asked. Robert, true to his word, treated her as the matriarch of the home. He invited her to sit at the head of the dinner table, made sure she had everything she needed, and reminded the children daily that their grandmother's sacrifices were the reason their family lived in comfort. But the final moment of healing did not come in whispers at home. It came in public, under the gaze of neighbors who had watched the family's fall and waited for its redemption. It was the children's school event, Family Day. Parents and grandparents were invited to watch the children perform, share food, and speak about their families. The hall buzzed with chatter, laughter, and clinking plates. Max and Lila, dressed neatly in their school uniforms, tugged Margaret's hands as they led her inside. "You have to sit in the front, Grandma," they said eagerly. "We're going to tell everyone about you." Linda walked behind them, her eyes lowered, her heart pounding. She knew the whispers would be there. She knew people would look at her differently. But she also knew what she had to do. When it was their turn, Max and Lila stood on stage, holding the microphone nervously. "This is our grandma," Lila said proudly, pointing to Margaret in the front row. She's the one who makes our favorite snacks and sings us lullabies. She's also the one who raised our mom, Max added firmly, his small voice carrying through the hall. She's the reason our family has everything we do. She's not a maid. She's our hero. The audience clapped warmly, some wiping away tears. All eyes turned to Margaret, who sat blushing, her hands pressed over her heart. Linda felt the weight of her children's words. She stood slowly, walked to the stage, and took the microphone. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "For too long," she began, "I let my pride blind me. I called the woman who gave me life a maid. I denied her in front of my children, in front of my community, and in front of God. Today, I want to say what I should have said from the start." She turned to Margaret, her eyes streaming with tears. "This is my mother. She is the reason I stand here, the reason my children laugh, the reason I have anything at all. And from this day forward, I will never again be ashamed to call her what she is, my mother." The hall erupted in applause. Some neighbors nodded, some wiped tears, and others whispered prayers of gratitude. Margaret, her body frail but her spirit blazing with love, stood with Robert's help. She embraced Linda on stage, her tears falling freely. "You will always be my daughter," she whispered. "But never again will you call me your maid." The children rushed into their arms, and for the first time, the family stood together, not divided by pride but bound by truth. That evening back at home the house felt different. The air no longer heavy, the walls no longer silent. Margaret sat in her rocking chair, watching the sunset through the wide window Robert had insisted she use. Linda knelt beside her, resting her head against her mother's lap like a child again. The children played at her feet, and Robert stood in the doorway, his face full of peace. Respect built on lies crumbles. But respect built on truth endures. Margaret had been humiliated, cast aside, stripped of her dignity. Yet she forgave. And in forgiving, she restored not only her daughter, but an entire home. Let us never forget the ones who carried us when we could not walk, who fed us when they themselves went hungry, who loved us even when we turned away. So tell me, my friends, have you thanked the ones who raised you today? Thank you for watching this story. Remember, behind every sacrifice is a love that never fades. Until next time, stay grateful, stay hopeful,